Mountain Jews or Caucasus Jews, also known as Uvuro, Kavkazi Jews or Gorky Jews, are Jews of the eastern and northern slopes of Caucasus, mainly Azerbaijan and Dagestan. They are the descendants of Persian Jews from Iran. The Mountain Jews community came established in ancient Persia. From the 5th century AD onwards, their language of Juhuri is an ancient southwest Iranian language and a Persian dialect which integrates many elements of ancient Hebrew. It is believed that they had reached Persia from ancient Israel as early as the 8th century BCE. They continued to migrate east, settling in mountainous areas of the Caucasus. The Mountain Jews survived numerous historical vicissitudes by settling in extremely remote and mountainous areas. They were known to be accomplished warriors and horseback riders. Mountain Jews are distinct from Georgian Jews of the Caucasus Mountains. They are culturally and ethnically different, speaking different languages and having many differences in customs and culture. History. Early history. The Mountain Jews, or Jews of the Caucasus, are believed to have inhabited Caucasia since the 5th century CE. They arrived from southwestern Iran. It is believed that they had arrived in Persia, from ancient Israel, as early as the 8th century BCE. Mountain Jews have an oral tradition, passed down generation after generation, that they have descended from the 10 lost tribes which were exiled by the king of Assyria, who ruled over northern Iraq from Mosul. The reference, no doubt, is to Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, who is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 18 verses 9 to 12. According to local Jewish tradition, some 19,000 Jews departed Jerusalem and passed through Syria, Babylonia, Persia and then entered, northbound, into Medai. The language of the Mountain Jews, Juhuri, is an ancient southwest Iranian language which integrates many elements of ancient Hebrew. Mountain Jews maintained a strong military tradition. For this reason, some historians believe they may be descended from Jewish military colonists, settled by Parthian and Sassanid rulers in the Caucasus as frontier guards against nomadic incursions from the Pontic steppe. A 2002 study by geneticist Dror Rosengarten found that the paternal haplotypes of Mountain Jews were shared with other Jewish communities and were consistent with a Mediterranean origin. In addition, Y-DNA testing of Mountain Jews has shown they have Y-DNA haplotypes related to those of other Jewish communities. The Semitic origin of Mountain Jews is also evident in their culture and language. The Jewish Valley. By the early 17th century, Mountain Jews formed many small settlements throughout mountain valleys of Dagestan. One valley, located 10 kilometers south of Derbent, close to the shore of the Caspian Sea, was predominantly populated by Mountain Jews. Their Muslim neighbors called this area Jewish Valley. The Jewish Valley grew to be a semi-independent Jewish state, with its spiritual and political center located in its largest settlement of Abasava. The valley prospered until the end of the 18th century, when its settlements were brutally destroyed in the war between Sheikh Ali Khan, who swore in loyalty to Russian Empire, and Surkhai Khan, the ruler of Kumukh. In the 18th–19th century, the Jews resettled from the highland to the coastal lowlands but carried the name Mountain Jews with them. In the villages, the Mountain Jews had settled in separate sections. In the lowland towns they also lived in concentrated neighborhoods, but their dwellings did not differ from those of their neighbors. Mountain Jews retained the dress of the Highlanders. They have continued to follow Jewish dietary laws and affirm their faith in family life. Soviet times, German Holocaust and modern history. By 1926, more than 85% of Mountain Jews in Dagestan were already classed as urban. Mountain Jews were mainly concentrated in the cities of Makhachkala, Binakh, Derbent, Nalchik and Grozny in North Caucasus, and Guba and Baku in Azerbaijan. In the Second World War, parts of their area in Dagestan were occupied by the German Wehrmacht at the end of 1942. During this period, they killed several hundreds of Mountain Jews until the Germans retreated early 1943. On September 20, 1942, Germans killed 420 Mountain Jews near the village of Bogdanovka. Many Mountain Jews survived, however, because German troops did not reach their areas. In addition, German authorities considered this group to be religious, but not racial, Jews. The Soviet Army's advances in the area brought the Nalchik community under its protection. The Mountain Jewish community of Nalchik was the largest Mountain Jewish community occupied by Nazis, and the vast majority of the population has survived. With the help of their Kabydian neighbors, Mountain Jews of Nalchik convinced SS squads that they were Tats, the native local people, and not related to the larger Jewish community. Although the Nazis watched the village carefully, Rabbi Nashamil ben Hiskayahu hid Sefer Torahs by burying them in a fake burial ceremony. The city was liberated a few months later. Given the marked changes in the 1990s following the dissolution of the Soviet Union and rise of nationalism in the region, many Mountain Jews permanently left their hometowns in the Caucasus and relocated to Moscow or abroad. During the First Chechen War, Jews suffered a high rate of kidnappings and violence at the hands of militants. Many Mountain Jews emigrated to Israel or the United States. Economy. While elsewhere in the Russian Empire, Jews were prohibited from owning land. At the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, the Mountain Jews owned land and were farmers and gardeners, growing mainly grain. Their oldest occupation was rice growing, but they also raised silkworms and cultivated tobacco. The Jewish vineyards were especially notable. The Jews and their Christian Armenian neighbors were the main producers of wine, as Muslims were prohibited by their religion from producing or consuming alcohol. Judaism, in turn, limited some types of meat consumption. Unlike their neighbors, the Jews raised few domestic animals. At the same time, they were renowned tanners. Tanning was their third most important economic activity after farming and gardening. At the end of the 19th century, 6% of Jews were engaged in this trade. Handicrafts and commerce were mostly practiced by Jews in towns. The Soviet authorities bound the Mountain Jews to collective farms, but allowed them to continue their traditional cultivation of grapes, tobacco, and vegetables, and making wine. In practical terms, the Jews are no longer isolated from other ethnic groups. With increasing urbanization and Sovietization in progress by the 1930s, a layer of intelligentsia began to form. By the late 1960s, academic professionals, such as pharmacists, medical doctors, and engineers, were quite common among the community. Mountain Jews worked in more professional positions than did Georgian Jews, though less than the Soviet Ashkenazi community, who were based in larger cities of Russia. A sizable number of Mountain Jewish worked in the entertainment industry in Dagestan. The Republic's world-acclaimed dancing ensemble, Lezginka, was led by Tanko Israelov, a Mountain Jew, for 21 years. Religion. Mountain Jews are considered, by some, to be of Sephardic lineage. This, however, is a misnomer, as they are neither Sephardi nor Ashkenazi but rather come directly by way of Persia. Mountain Jews tenaciously held to their religion throughout the centuries, developing their own unique traditions and religious practices. Mountain Jewish traditions are infused with teachings of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. Mountain Jews have traditionally maintained a two-tiered rabbinate, distinguishing between a rabbi and a dayan. A rabbi was a title given to religious leaders performing the functions of liturgical preachers and cantors in synagogues, teachers in Jewish schools, and shoshes. A dayan was a chief rabbi of a town, presiding over Beit Dins and representing the highest religious authority for the town and nearby smaller settlements. Dayans were elected democratically by community leaders. The religious survival of the community was not without difficulties. In the prosperous days of Jewish Valley, the spiritual center of Mountain Jews centered on the settlement of Abasava. Many works of religious significance were written in Abasava. Here, Elisha ben Shmuel HaKatan wrote several of his piyuts. Theologist Gerson Lala ben Moshe Nakedi, who lived in Abisava in 18th century, wrote a commentary to Mishneh Torah of Maimonides. Rabbi Matithya ben Shmuel HaKohen Mizrahi wrote his Kabbalistic essay Kol HaMiveza in Abisava. With the brutal destruction of Abisava, however, the religious center of mountain Jews moved to Debent. He investigated their position and learned that because of their physical isolation, many mountain Jewish communities lacked spiritual and educational leaders, although they maintained their cultural and religious identity. The rabbi organized a determined campaign to strengthen the community's faith. He appointed a distinguished scholar, Rabbi Shmuel Levitin, to organize Jewish schools and Talmudist seminaries in the Caucasus and to train the next generation of rabbis, teachers, hazans, and shoshes who could perform religious rituals according to community's tradition. The task proved quite difficult, as mountain Jews initially resisted the authority of Ashkenazi rabbis. Prominent rabbis of mountain Jews in the 19th century included Shalom ben Melik Mizrahi of Temir Khan Shura, Chief Rabbi of Dagestan Jacob ben Isaac Mizrahi, and Rabbi Hiskayahu ben Avram of Nalchik, whose son Rabbi Nahamiel ben Hiskayahu later played a crucial role in saving Nalchik's Jewish community from the Nazis. In the early decades of the Soviet Union, the government's efforts to suppress religion and assimilate the Jews expressed prevailing Soviet anti-Semitism. In the 1920s and 1930s, the Soviet Union started a more aggressive persecution campaign against Judaism. During this time, Soviet authorities propagated the myth that mountain Jews were not part of the world Jewish people at all, but rather members of Tat community that settled in the region. Soviet anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism rhetoric was intensified during Khrushchev's rule. In 1960, blood libel accusations shook Dagestan. Increasingly hostile atmosphere towards their faith and national identity affected mountain Jews. At the beginning of the 1950s, there were synagogues in all major mountain Jewish communities. By 1966, reportedly 6 synagogues remained, some were confiscated by the Soviet authorities. While mountain Jews observed the rituals of circumcision, marriage and burial, as well as Jewish holidays, other precepts of Jewish faith were observed less carefully. The community's ethnic identity remained unshaken despite the Soviet efforts. Cases of intermarriage with Muslims in Azerbaijan or Dagestan were rare, as both groups practice endogamy. After the fall of the Soviet Union, mountain Jews experienced a significant religious revival, with increasing religious observance by members of the younger generation. Educational institutions, language, literature. Mountain Jews speak Duhuri, a form of Persian. It belongs to the southwestern group of the Iranian division of the Indo-European languages. Duhuri has Semitic elements on all linguistic levels. Among other Semitic elements, Duhuri has the Hebrew sound, ayin, whereas no neighboring languages have it. Until the early Soviet period, the language was written with semi-cursive Hebrew alphabet. Later, Duhuri books, newspapers, textbooks, and other materials were printed with a Latin alphabet and finally in Cyrillic, which is still most common today. The first Duhuri language newspaper, Zakmitkesh, was published in 1928 and operated until the second half of the 20th century. Originally, only boys were educated through synagogue schools. Starting from the 1860s, many well-off families switched to homeschooling, hiring private tutors, who taught their sons not only Hebrew, but also Russian and Yiddish. In the early 20th century, with advance of Sovietization, Duhuri became the language of instruction at newly founded elementary schools attended by both mountain Jewish boys and girls. This policy continued until the beginning of World War II, when schools switched to Russian as the central government emphasized acquisition of Russian as the official language of the Soviet Union. The mountain Jewish community has had notable figures in public health, education, culture, and art. However, the names of some individuals known in Russia and even internationally cannot be cited as Mountain Jews because, for the most part, they are officially identified as Tats, Azerbaijanis, Dagestanis, and even Russians. The practice traces back to Soviet times, when with encouragement of the state, some Mountain Jews hid their identity to avoid antisemitism. In the 21st century, the government is encouraging the cultural life of minorities. In Dagestan and Kabardino-Balkaria, Jewry and Hebrew courses have been introduced in traditionally Mountain Jewish schools. In Dagestan, there is support for the revival of the Jewry language theatre and the publication of newspapers in that language. Culture, military tradition and we, the Tats we, Samson warriors, Barkosh Bazes. We went into battles and bitterly, heroically struggled for our freedom. The Song of the Mountain Jews. Mountain Jews are known for their military tradition and have been historically viewed as fierce warriors. Some historians suggest that the group traces its beginnings to Persian Jewish soldiers who were stationed in the Caucasus by the Sasanian kings in the 5th or 6th century to protect the area from the onslaughts of the Huns and other nomadic invaders from the east. Men were typically heavily armed and some slept without removing their weapons. Dress. Over time, the Mountain Jews adopted the dress of their Muslim neighbors. Men typically wore chokers and covered their head with parkas, many variations of which could symbolize the men's social status. Wealthier men's dress was adorned with many pieces of jewelry, including silver and gold-decorated weaponry, pins, chains, belts, or kisets. Women's dress was typically of simpler design in dark tones, made from silk, brocade, velvet, satin and later wool. They decorated the fabric with beads, gold pins or buttons, and silver gold-plated belts. Outside the house, both single and married women covered their hair with headscarves. Cuisine. Mountain Jewish cuisine absorbed typical dishes from various peoples of the Caucasus, Azerbaijani and Persian cuisine, adjusting some recipes to conform to the laws of kashrut. Typical Mountain Jewish dishes include churdu, shashlik, dolma, kurz or dushper, jarpaji, kinkali, tara, nemov, plov, bugalim, etc. Jewish holidays-themed dishes include eshkena, a Persian soup, prepared for Passover, and a variety of hoshaleva typically prepared for Purim. Notable Mountain Jews. Asterix, producer of trance music. Yekutiel Adam, Israeli general and former deputy chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces. Udi Adam, Israeli general and the former head of the Israeli Northern Command. Omer Adam, Israeli singer. Albert Hagirunov, the national hero of Azerbaijan, a Starshina of the Azerbaijani army who died during the Nagorno-Karabakh War. Isjolov Shalumov, novelist, poet and playwright. Ilona Davidova, famous Russian-American entrepreneur, linguist, author, developer of novel high-speed technique for studying English. Seaman Nikolovich Divilov, scientist, economist, member of the board of the State Planning Committee of Azerbaijan 1952–1982. Sarat Haddad, Israeli singer. Gabriel Abramovich Elizarov, a Soviet physician, known for inventing the Elizarov apparatus for lengthening limb bones and for his eponymous surgery. Zarek Aliyev, businessman and entrepreneur, Russian real estate magnate. Telman Ishmailov, businessman and entrepreneur, owner of AST Group. Sergei Izgyayev, author, translator, and songwriter. Tamara Muzikhanova, Soviet sculptor and ceramist. Mikhail Mishailov, Soviet, Russian artist and teacher. Godnizanov, Russian businessman and entrepreneur, real estate magnate. Lior Rafaelov, Israeli football player. Israel Svagenbaum, Russian-American artist. Yafa Yarkoni, Israeli singer, winner of the Israel Prize in 1998. German Zakhariev, Vice President of the East Asian Jewish Congress, Vice President of the World Congress of Mountain Jews. President of the International Mountain Dew Charity Fund, STMEGI. Jasmine, Russian pop singer, winner of numerous music awards, including Golden Gramophone Award, Ovation, and MTV Russia Music Awards. Gallery. Mountain Dew. Circa 1898. Mountain, Jewish woman from Dagestan. 1870 to 1880. Mountain, Jewish woman and her children. Circa 1900. Mountain Jews of the Caucasus. Circa 1900.